We are currently in a new boom when it comes to Asian representation in Hollywood. Alongside Crazy Rich Asians, the John Cho film Searching and the romantic comedy To All the Boys I've Loved Before have all proved critically and commercially successful, all within the same time frame. This has even led to some people calling the month Asian August. I already covered Flower Drum Song, which was Hollywood's first attempt at an all-Asian cast, so I felt like taking a look at another significant Asian story from the 60s. The World of Suzie Wong was a novel by Richard Mason, and it came out in 1958. The story followed architect-turned-artist Robert Lomax and his romance with Hong Kong native Suzie Wong. The book was an instant bestseller, and it got a stage adaptation with William Shatner as Robert and France Nguyen of South Pacific fame as Suzie. The play was even running at the same time as the stage version of Flower Drum Song. And naturally, the film adaptation followed suit. Robert was played by William Holden, and France Nguyen was supposed to play Suzie, but she was replaced with Nancy Kwan for, reasons.
To Americans, all Chinese look alike, for goodness sake.
Despite critics not liking it, it was a commercial success, and even turned Nancy Kwan into the leading Asian actress of Hollywood at the time.
Well, everybody talking about that film, for goodness sake.
It's got a somewhat controversial reception for its dialogue, its somewhat soapy plot, and of course what Suzie does for a living.
Me so horny. Me so horny. Me love you long time.
The film was actually pretty daring for its depiction of the oldest profession. I'll take you back to a 1932 film called Shanghai Express, which was pretty open about what its female leads did for a living.
What kind of a house did you say? A boarding house. Oh.
One of them is yellow and the other one is white, but both their souls are rotten.
That's because it was 1932 and it was before the Hays Code really cracked down on what you could see in films. Sex could never be portrayed on the big screen, and neither could extramarital relations. So, as a result, prostitutes usually got toned down to being dancers or bar girls. The most laughable example of this is a film called From Here to Eternity.
Oh, I don't like it, but I don't mind it.
In the book it's based on, the soldiers regularly visit a brothel. In the film it's a gentleman's club, and the whores become hostesses.
In another year, I'll be back home with a stocking full of money.
In the 60s, the Hays Code was finally losing its influence, and the film Psycho had really broken down the barriers by showing sympathetic adulterers, using the word transvestite, and featuring obvious nudity. You feel the effects of the code in Suzie Wong as well. In the book, Robert was actually staying in a brothel. In the film, it's just a hotel where the girls just happen to frequent.
Well, I suppose you have to draw the line somewhere.
Suzie and her friends can't even go into the bar unless they have a man with them.
You asked me to bring you in here.
Now I'm in. Thank you very much.
But there is no doubt in the audience's mind that Suzie is a prostitute, and that's how she makes her money. We'll get to that.
No love, no feeling, just like holding someone for a dance.
There are several problematic parts to the film, which you would expect from a Hollywood story about Asians from the 1960s. Colorism definitely comes into play. Suzie is a poor one-shy girl, and yet she's been played by Eurasian actresses who are given makeup to look a little more convincingly Asian, but she's still more Anglo-looking than any of her Chinese friends.
Well, you're easily the prettiest girl in Hong Kong.
You think so?
And when it comes to how her and her friends speak...
I not dirty street girl. I not dirty street girl. New picture just started. Very good. I see 3 times.
Seriously, their clients are all British and American. You'd think they'd speak perfect English by now. But in fairness to her friends, they feel more like characters and less like stereotypes. They thankfully avoid the...
Me love you long time. Me so horny.
In some ways, these are Chinese girls who just happen to be prostitutes. Gwenny Lee even says she's only doing it for a few years until she can pursue another career.
Someday I open knitting shop. I not stay here. Not good. All I need is enough money.
The film does carry the values of the time it was made, and there are some laughably cringy moments, like Suzie pretending Robert hit her and then bragging that it's a sign that he loves her.
So sorry you not have nice men to beat you up.
Then there's...
Take that terrible dress off.
This expensive dress.
I don't care what it costs. You look like a cheap European streetwalker.
You see, we're meant to sympathise with him here, you know. Poor guy. She's just been so awful to him the whole film, just look at what she's made him do.
Get out of my life, will you?
Yeah, so I usually prefer to skip this scene whenever I watch the film. There's also some more superficial cringe in how the dialogue is written.
He's the only man in my life I've ever wanted. If I had
to get in the way she did, I'll do it.
But what about the movie's depiction of the oldest profession as it pertains to Asian girls? Journalist H.Y. Nam says that a good portion of the criticism comes from people who haven't seen the movie but still grew up in its shadow. On paper, the movie is about an Asian prostitute who falls for a white man. He says, "In the Asian consciousness, the two most offensive images are Suzie Wong and Madame Butterfly, because they degrade Asian women as prostitutes and insult Asian men by implying that only Caucasian men are worthy objects of love. The stereotype of the Asian hooker is of a woman who is aggressively sexual, submissive, and usually needs to be saved by a wealthy white man. But Suzie Wong doesn't really conform to those stereotypes. Suzie is sexual, yes, but that's only because it's what she does for a living."
Take clothes off?
No, I've never tried nudes.
Good time to try.
And these scenes where she's teasing Robert come from an established dynamic between them.
Virgin! Yes, virgin! That's me.
No, but it's not the kind of thing one goes about shouting on a ferry boat.
Oh, I'm proud to be good girl.
It's mostly her having fun scandalizing these respectable white people.
She virgin?
Well, if you wait a minute, I'll ask.
Never mind. You'll find out.
It's implied that some of her clients are middle-class expats who see her in secret and project an image of respectability when they're in public. So you could interpret these scenes as Suzie calling these men on their hypocrisy. They project this image of wholesome respectability, but in secret they're cheating on their wives with prostitutes. And Suzie gets a reputation of being submissive, but she really isn't. Take this scene where a sailor wants her, and when he refuses to take no for an answer, she fights him off. And when Robert offends her late in the film, she leaves him, and she only comes back to him because she needs help. In this dynamic, Suzie and Robert are equally matched in terms of power. There's a scene where Robert takes Suzie to a high-class restaurant and has to read the menu for her, but that's then paralleled when Suzie takes Robert to one of her favourite restaurants and has to translate for him, showing an equal dynamic of power sharing. There are also points of the story where both take turns financially supporting the other. What I'm going to talk about next is going to spoil the movie for you, so you have been warned. Although the film is shown through the lens of a white male lead, that doesn't mean it isn't Suzie's story. She has plenty of agency in the plot, and she's given a backstory to explain her situation.
Not good for Chinese wife anymore. Not good for anything. What do you think ignorant 10-year-old Chinese girl going to do?
She's not just a prostitute because she's slutty and Asian. She was orphaned at a young age and she had to turn to prostitution to survive.
Now, I keep asking myself, what would I have done if I had been she? Frightened child, hungry, alone? Would I steal to survive? Would I...
And the plot point where she becomes Ben's mistress is later revealed to be because she has a baby boy that she has to provide for.
Father, very important man. Work for government. But he not want baby.
Suzie's actions in the first half of the film all come out of a desire for financial security, which is why she's posing for Robert's paintings in the first place. Suzie is shown as a character who has been used and abused in the past, and that's why she is the way she is. H.Y. Nam referenced Madame Butterfly in terms of Asian stereotyping. It's most famous as an opera about a Western soldier who marries a Japanese girl and then rejects her in favour of a white woman, even taking the child they have together to raise in the West. The story is mocked for perpetuating the stereotype of the submissive Asian woman when it's actually criticising the cruel treatment of Japan at the hands of the West. The opera has Butterfly committing suicide in true tragic heroine fashion, but the book it's based on has her surviving and escaping with the baby. Both stories portray her as a victim of Western racism. This context often gets diluted in the public's mind by their presentation. Take In This Our Life, a melodrama from the 1940s based on an Ellen Glasgow novel about race relations in the American South. In the book, a wealthy white woman frames an innocent black man for her crimes because it's her word against his and sends him to jail, all to make a powerful statement about race relations. The film is different. The Hays Code insisted that Stanley had to be punished for her crimes, so she dies in a fiery car crash and Parry is saved by some heroic white people. Baby steps. The World of Suzie Wong, on the other hand, does not pull any punches when it comes to racism. The movie goes there with the racism of the white expats in Hong Kong towards the Chinese locals. This scene of Robert taking Suzie to dinner is used to show that Suzie is treated like an outcast in her own country. It's made clear that the majority of men in Suzie's life see her as a sex toy and nothing else. Whether by the sailors who want her without her consent, or by Ben who takes her as his mistress and then drops her without even having the balls to tell her. Kay likewise even gets her father to blackmail Robert into dumping Suzie.
For example, I couldn't employ a man in my bank who married such a girl.
This is after an earlier scene showing both of them as being liberal.
Now they're still married. How nice.
Yes. And he's still Chinese.
Kay too is implied to be less motivated by wanting Robert and more out of jealousy that he's picking a poor Chinese woman over her.
Are you going to help me or a wench I street girl?
She and her father are not shameless villains like Stanley Fitzroy, but characters who are introduced as nice, reasonable, and helpful. So when these prejudices are revealed, it's meant to sting. Robert's more progressive attitude is shown as the exception rather than the rule.
I could have changed that. That's what I didn't understand.
Robert himself is not just a saintly white man who miraculously sees Suzie as a person. He too comes with these prejudices.
If I get hungry and beg on street, this will make you feel happy?
Late in the film, he's struggling financially and he seems offended by the idea of Suzie supporting him. It's mainly because she'd go back to prostitution to do so, but there's a racial dynamic there as well. Robert's character arc in the film is learning to let go of these prejudices in the name of love. And when it comes to the idea of a white man saving an Asian woman in favour of a better life in the West, this never comes up in the film. The only time it does come up is when Suzie jokes about it.
Oh yes, I go to America next month to marry rich Chinese. You say I go to America?
Oh, travel agent, huh?
The film shows an equal balance of culture sharing between Suzie and Robert. Suzie happily shows Robert around the city, takes him to some of her favourite places, and teaches him a lot about her culture.
So in the end they get married.
And reign happily ever after.
Do you not believe?
The only remotely imperialist attitude comes when Robert gets Suzie to wear a traditional Chinese dress, and that's mainly just for a painting. She is never objectified or exoticized. Robert does not try to change Suzie or westernize her. The scene where they get together even has Suzie asking Robert how Kay would behave.
If you ask a nice English girl to stay with you, she stay first time you ask her?
After trying to do that, she ends up being herself, and that's why they get together.
It's now tomorrow, Robert. I never do anything like this before.
The film does not end with an agenda. Robert and Suzie don't split up because races aren't supposed to mix, nor does Robert save Suzie for a better life in the West. It ends with the two lovers getting together and nothing else. No political or social statement beyond one of love.
I'll be with you until you say, Suzie, go away.
That long.
The World of Suzie Wong is not a story about a poor Asian woman who needs to be rescued by a rich white man. It is a story about two lovers from very different backgrounds falling in love even when their society tells them they shouldn't be together. It is, at its heart, a love story, and it's actually one of my favourite love stories of all time. It's a beautiful film, showing a girl who's been treated like an object all her life, finding a man who loves her for who she is. And showing a man who's lived an unfulfilled life, meeting a girl who makes him a better person in every way. The film is nicely shot on location, and the scenes showing Hong Kong make it a valuable time capsule of what the city looked like in the 60s. H.Y. Nam finally sat down to watch the film after interviewing Nancy Kwan, and he had this to say: "The revulsion never came. None of the vulgarity the imagination conjures up at the mention of Suzie Wong. As awful as it sounds, I can't dislike the film. I come away with an appreciation for Kwan's beauty and talent." Nancy Kwan herself is proud of the film, just as she is of Flower Drum Song. When asked about enforcing the stereotype of the Asian prostitute, she said, "Oh, so if you mean I played a nun and it became a very successful film, then Asian women would be seen as nuns?" She sees the film as something that helped put Asians on the map, but it's hard to argue with that logic. They didn't change the game overnight, but the barriers had been broken down. Nancy even turned down a role in the Joy Luck Club calling Suzie Wong a horrible racist film, and they refused to remove it. The World of Suzie Wong might be a great many things, including dated and slightly corny, but I don't think it's racist, and I definitely don't think it's horrible.